A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Blood on Snow. The frozen lake lay stretched out before Isadora Halvard, its icy surface a solid sheet that groaned beneath winter's tight hold. At 24, she had learned how to understand those sounds, the quiet warnings nature offered to anyone willing to listen. 3 years alone in the frozen peaks had taught her lessons the pack never did. Survival depended on noticing the small details others chose to ignore. Her breath fogged the air as she knelt beside the fishing hole she had cut through the ice earlier that morning. Back then, the wind had been mild, hardly tugging at the hood of her weathered cloak. Now, several hours later, the sky had deepened into a bruised shade of purple. Storm clouds gathered above the mountains, heavy with threat. Isadora drew her line from the water. 2 trout dangled from the hook, enough to last several days if she measured each meal carefully. Her stomach tightened at the thought of rationing again, but hunger was nothing new. Hunger could be endured. The other option, returning to civilization and enduring the murmurs that followed broken omegas, could not. "Time to go," she murmured as she collected her tools. The words sounded unfamiliar. After 3 years of speaking only to herself, conversation had become strange, even when it existed only in her mind. The first snowflakes drifted down as she fastened the fish to her belt. They were large and heavy, the kind that signaled a dangerous storm. Isadora's wolf shifted uneasily beneath her skin, a faint presence that had always felt unfinished. Even now, after years alone, her wolf was little more than a whisper when it should have thundered. She remembered the ritual. 21 years old, surrounded by her entire pack, standing within the sacred circle as moonlight washed over the clearing. Every shifter watched as she called to her wolf, pleaded for it to step forward and take its rightful place. Instead, what answered was weak and fractured. A wolf that flickered in and out of being, never fully forming, never fully fading. The pack elders had regarded her with pity. The younger wolves had turned away, unwilling to face such frailty among their own. "Omega," they whispered. "Broken." Isadora pushed the memory aside and began the walk back toward her cabin. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes blurring the familiar trail. Still, she knew these woods by heart, having walked them through every season and every kind of weather. 6 miles lay between the lake and her cabin. She could cover the distance in under 2 hours, even with a storm pressing in. The wind rose suddenly, screaming through the pines. Within moments, the light snowfall became a blinding blizzard. Isadora drew her hood closer and kept moving, every step measured and steady. Panic served no one. Her father, Halvard, had taught her that lesson before his death 4 years earlier. The memory sent a familiar ache through her chest. He had been the pack's healer, the one who could mend injuries others could not. Respected. Needed. She had worked beside him, learning herbs and roots, how to set bones and stitch flesh. Then came the accident. A fall, they said. He had slipped on slick stones while gathering moss near the river gorge. His body was discovered below, shattered beyond even his remarkable healing abilities. Isadora had been 20, grieving and alone, when the pack Alpha called for her. Alpha Fenrir of the Ironwood Territory sought a bride, a political match to secure hunting lands and trade routes. The Alpha chose Isadora, perhaps because she was already broken, already a failure. What difference did it make where such a wolf was sent? Her sister Ingrid had begged her not to flee. "You'll die out there alone," she had pleaded, clutching Isadora's hands the night before the wedding. "Please, just do this. Just survive." But Isadora had seen the way Fenrir looked at her during the betrothal feast. Hunger mixed with contempt in his gaze, the stare of a man handed damaged goods, but willing to claim them anyway. She had run into these mountains that very night, choosing uncertain death over guaranteed misery. Ingrid believed her dead now. The thought twisted painfully through Isadora's chest whenever she allowed it to surface. Her sister was 26, likely married by now, likely ashamed of the coward who had left her to face the pack's judgment alone. A sound sliced through the storm, dragging Isadora from her spiraling thoughts. Not the wind. Something else. Something alive. And hurting. She stopped and turned slowly, eyes fighting the wall of white. There, barely visible through the blizzard, a dark shape moved. Large. Four-legged. A wolf, but enormous. Far larger than any natural beast. A shifter, then. The wolf staggered, its legs giving way. It collapsed into the snow and went still. Isadora's breath hitched. Every instinct screamed at her to keep moving, to reach her cabin before the storm claimed her life. Yet her feet carried her forward, pulled by something she couldn't explain. As she drew closer, shapes sharpened through the falling snow. Black fur streaked with silver, soaked and clumped with blood. Wounds lined the wolf's sides, deep gashes that carried a sickening scent. Wolfsbane, and beneath it, something sharp and toxic. Silver. She dropped to her knees beside the enormous creature, her breath bursting out in quick white clouds. Up close, its size was staggering, easily twice the bulk of any shifter she had ever seen. An alpha, without doubt. A powerful one. "Who did this to you?" she whispered, knowing the unconscious wolf could not respond. Her hand lifted without her permission, fingers reaching for the blood-matted fur. The instant she touched it, a surge of energy ripped through her. Not pain, but a shocking intensity. Power raced up her arm, through her chest, igniting, something buried deep inside. Her wolf, the weak, broken fragment she carried, suddenly roared to life. For the first time in 3 years, Isadora felt complete. The feeling vanished the moment she pulled her hand back, leaving her gasping, disoriented. She touched the wolf again, and once more the power rushed through her, strength she had never known flooding her limbs. "This can't be happening," she whispered. The storm worsened, the wind shoving at her as if trying to throw her down. She had to choose: leave the wolf to die, or somehow get it to shelter. The creature had to weigh at least 3 times more than she did. Carrying it was impossible. Except when she grabbed the wolf by the scruff, that impossible strength returned. Her muscles didn't burn. Her legs didn't tremble. She hauled the massive body onto her shoulders in a motion that should have been absurd, yet felt effortless. Isadora rose, the wolf's weight pressing against her, and started walking. 6 miles. 6 miles through a blizzard, carrying a dying alpha. Her mind screamed that she would fail, that she would collapse halfway and freeze beside the stranger. Her body refused to listen. Each step grew easier than the last, as though touching the wolf's fur-fed strength straight into her bones. Her wolf sang within her, more alive than it had been since the failed ritual. Whatever this creature was, whatever power it held, it called to something deep and unbreakable within Isadora. The journey dissolved into whiteness and cold and an unbroken push forward. Her world shrank to a single step, then another, then another. Time stopped mattering. Distance stopped mattering. The only thing that felt real was the warmth of the wolf's body across her shoulders, a steady anchor in the madness around her. When her cabin finally appeared through the blizzard, Isadora almost cried with relief. She forced the door open, dragged the wolf inside, and collapsed beside it on the floor. Her body trembled from strain and freezing cold, but she had done it. 6 miles through a deadly storm, carrying a creature that should have been impossible to move. She pushed herself up, tore off her soaked cloak, and turned to properly look at her unexpected guest. In the faint glow of her banked fire, the wolf seemed even larger. Blood smeared the floor beneath it. Those wounds needed care immediately, or the creature would die despite her efforts. Isadora grabbed her supplies, the herbs and tools her father had taught her to use. Her hands worked with practiced accuracy, cleaning the gashes, packing them with poultices meant to draw poison out. The wolfsbane alone was dangerous, but mixed with silver it formed something far deadlier, capable of killing even the strongest alpha. "Who were you running from?" she murmured to the unconscious wolf, her voice barely more than breath. "And why does it feel like my life just changed forever?" The wolf's breathing was shallow but steady. It would survive, at least through the night. Whether it would thank her for saving it or curse her for interfering was another matter entirely. Outside, the blizzard raged against the cabin walls, trapping them both inside. Isadora added more wood to the fire and settled on the floor beside the massive body. Energy still hummed through her, lingering from the contact, her wolf more awake than it had been in years. Tomorrow would bring questions. Tomorrow, she would demand answers. But tonight, as the storm screamed and the strange wolf's chest rose and fell beneath silver-streaked fur, Isadora accepted one quiet truth. She was no longer alone. And somehow, frighteningly, that changed everything. Chapter 2. Fever and Firelight. The wolf did not wake during the first day. Isadora replaced the poultices 3 times, her hands moving with the steady skill her father had drilled into her over years of training. Each time she lifted the herb-soaked cloth, she expected the wounds to look the same or worse. Instead, they looked better. Not healed, but closing far faster than any wound should, especially ones tainted with wolfsbane and silver. "That shouldn't be possible," she murmured, pressing fresh yarrow and comfrey into the deepest gash along the wolf's ribs. The blend should have drawn out poison, yes, but the speed of recovery defied every natural rule she knew. She had seen powerful alphas heal from similar injuries. It took weeks, not hours. The wolf's chest rose and fell in a calm, steady rhythm, each breath deep and even despite the damage its body had suffered. Isadora leaned back on her heels, watching the creature in the firelight. Its fur was striking up close, black as a starless night, threaded with silver that seemed to glimmer when the flames flickered. She had never seen coloring like it. Her own wolf stirred beneath her skin, pushing forward with an urgency that felt unfamiliar. For 3 years, that presence had been little more than a murmur, a shadow of what it should have been. Now it paced restlessly, focused entirely on the massive creature taking up most of her cabin floor. "What are you trying to tell me?" Isadora asked quietly. "Important?" her wolf seemed to answer. "He is important." The word echoed through her chest, heavy with meaning she couldn't grasp. Important how? Important to whom? She was a rejected Omega living alone in the mountains. Nothing and no one mattered to her survival except herself. Still, she couldn't deny the pull drawing her toward this stranger. Carrying him through the blizzard, touching his fur, had filled her with strength she had never known. Even now, sitting beside him, she felt more complete than she had in years, as if some missing piece had finally locked into place. The storm raged through the night and into the second day. Snow packed itself against the cabin walls, sealing the door shut. Isadora didn't mind. She had enough supplies to last for weeks, and being cut off meant no unexpected visitors. Not that she had visitors anymore, but old habits of caution were hard to shed. She spent the second day preparing fresh poultices and checking the wolf's wounds again and again. The improvement continued to amaze her. By evening, several of the smaller cuts had sealed completely, leaving only faint pink lines beneath the fur. The larger wounds still oozed, but even those showed astonishing progress. "Who are you?" she asked the unconscious wolf as she settled down for the night. The cabin was small, barely big enough for her narrow bed, a table, and the fireplace. With the massive wolf stretched across the floor, the space felt even tighter. She dragged her blankets down to sleep near the fire, telling herself it was practical. The wolf needed warmth to heal. It had nothing to do with the strange sense of comfort she felt in its presence. She rested her hand on the wolf's shoulder, her fingers sinking into the thick fur. That familiar electric spark flared beneath her palm, racing up her arm and settling in her chest, where her own wolf answered with something that felt almost like contentment. Isadora closed her eyes and let the sensation move through her. For the first time since her father's death, she did not feel completely alone. Sleep took her slowly, pulled under by exhaustion and the steady warmth of the fire. She dreamed of running through forests she had never seen, of a voice speaking her name in tones that made her heart pound. The dreams felt important, heavy with meaning she could not quite understand. Light filtering through the window woke her on the third morning. She opened her eyes gradually, awareness returning in pieces. The fire had burned low. She would need to add wood. Her body ached from sleeping on the hard floor. Her hand still rested on something warm and solid and not fur. Isadora's eyes flew open. Her hand lay against skin. Smooth skin, marked with scars, stretched over muscle that tightened beneath her touch. She yanked her hand back and scrambled away until her spine struck the cabin wall. Where the wolf had been, a man now lay. He was enormous, even in human form, filling the space the wolf had occupied. Broad shoulders narrowed to a lean waist, every line of him shaped by years of hard training. Scars crossed his torso, old wounds that spoke of endless battles. His face, partly hidden by black hair that fell past his shoulders, was striking in its severe beauty. A full beard framed his jaw, neatly kept despite his condition. Even unconscious and wounded, he radiated power, the kind that made lesser wolves submit without thought. An alpha, without question. And more than that. The presence rolling off him pressed against her senses with crushing force. This was no ordinary pack alpha. This was something far greater. Isadora forced herself to breathe evenly, to push past the shock. Shifters sometimes changed forms while unconscious, usually when their bodies decided. The other shape would heal more effectively. She had read about it in her father's journals, though she had never seen it herself. The fact that this man had remained a wolf for 2 days before shifting suggested the animal form had been necessary to survive the worst of the injuries. She grabbed a blanket and covered him, turning her gaze away from his naked body even as warmth crept up her neck. 3 years of solitude had not entirely stripped her of propriety. Once he was covered, she edged closer, forcing herself to examine his wounds with clinical focus. Or she tried to. Her hands shook faintly as she drew back the blanket to inspect the injuries that had looked terrible on the wolf. In human form, they seemed even more lethal. Deep gashes crossed his ribs, only barely closed. Puncture wounds marked his shoulders and back. The scent of wolfsbane still clung to his skin, mixed with the sharp metallic trace of silver. Someone had meant to kill him. Someone had used weapons crafted specifically to destroy shifters. As she washed the wounds with fresh water, the man shifted. His breathing changed, growing fast and shallow. A low sound escaped his throat, not quite a growl, but close. His head rolled restlessly, dark hair slipping back from his face. "No," he muttered, the word harsh and barely formed. "Can't, won't let." Isadora stilled, the cloth suspended above his chest. He was delirious, trapped in fevered visions. She should remain silent, let it pass. But worry and curiosity tangled inside her. "You're safe," she said quietly, the first words she had spoken to him in this form. "Rest." His eyes flew open, and Isadora's breath caught. They were amber, bright as living fire, filled with a fierce intensity that locked her in place. For a brief moment, those eyes focused on her with startling clarity. His lips moved, shaping a single word that sounded torn from somewhere deep within him. "Mate." Then his eyes rolled back, and he slipped into unconsciousness once more. Isadora remained frozen, her heart hammering so loudly she could hear blood roaring in her ears. "Mate," He had called her mate. The word echoed through her wolf, which surged forward with sudden, fierce recognition. But that was impossible. She had never seen this man before. Mate bonds did not work like that. They required time, closeness, shared acknowledgement. Unless they didn't. Unless the stories she had heard as a child were true. The ones about fated mates who knew each other instantly, whose souls reached for one another across distance and circumstance. She had always dismissed those tales as fantasies, stories meant to give young wolves dreams of romance instead of preparing them for political unions and pack bargains. "You're delirious," she told the unconscious man firmly, as though he could hear her. "You don't know what you're saying." Her wolf disagreed fiercely, pacing and pressing against her control with unusual force. "Mine," it seemed to insist. "Ours. Protect." As the hours passed, the man's fever worsened. He thrashed weakly, murmuring words that made little sense together but painted a picture of betrayal and desperation. He spoke of poison and counsels, of enemies hiding behind friendly faces. One name surfaced again and again: Bjorn, sometimes spoken like a curse, sometimes like a plea. "Bjorn," he gasped during one particularly violent fit. "Get back. Tell them. Traitor in the—" His body jerked violently, and Isadora held him steady, using the blanket to keep him from hurting himself further. She pressed cool cloths to his forehead, forced water past his lips when she could, and prayed to gods she had long stopped believing in that he would survive. As the third day bled into the fourth, the fever finally broke. The man's thrashing ceased, his breathing evened out into true sleep rather than delirious unconsciousness. Isadora sagged with relief, every bone in her body heavy with exhaustion. She had scarcely slept since finding him, terrified that even a moment of inattention might let death claim him. Outside, the storm had finally eased. Through the window, pale sunlight strained through thick clouds. They were still snowbound, but the worst was over. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt confined in another way. Trapped by the presence of this stranger who had called her mate, who carried wounds born of deadly enemies, whose very being made her wolf sing. "Who are you?" she whispered to the sleeping man. "And what have I brought into my home?" He did not answer, nor had she expected him to. Tomorrow, he might awaken fully. Tomorrow, she would demand explanations. But tonight, as the fire flickered and the stranger's chest rose and fell with steady breath, Isadora allowed herself a single thought. Perhaps she had saved him for a reason. Perhaps, against all logic and caution, he truly was what he had claimed. His Mate. Chapter 3. Truths and Transformations. Oryx awoke to firelight dancing across the rough wooden beams and the scent of herbs that reminded him of battlefield healers. His body throbbed with deep, bone-weary pain, proof of injuries that should have killed him but somehow had not. For a long moment, he simply breathed, taking stock of his body, marveling that he still lived. The cabin was small, barely large enough for the essentials. A woman sat near the fire, her back to him, stirring a pot that smelled of venison and root vegetables. Chestnut hair fell in waves past her shoulders, catching coppery highlights in the flames. She was slight, shoulders narrow beneath a worn wool dress, yet something about her presence filled the room. "You're awake," she said, without turning, her voice calm but firm. Oryx attempted to sit, immediately regretting the motion. Pain lanced through his ribs, forcing him back down with a grunt that sounded more like a growl than a human sound. "Don't move yet." She turned, and Oryx found himself looking into gray-blue eyes that held caution, and something else he couldn't quite name. "Your wounds are barely closed. You'll tear them open." He forced himself to stay still, though every instinct screamed at him to assess his surroundings, to prepare for attack. "How long?" he asked. "4 days since I found you. 3 since you shifted." She ladled stew into a wooden bowl and approached carefully, as one might approach a dangerous animal. "Can you sit long enough to eat?" Oryx managed to prop himself against the wall, taking the bowl with trembling hands. The weakness enraged him, but he forced it down. Weakness invited attack, and he could not afford that now, not when enemies still hunted him. As he ate, she kept her distance, watching with those careful eyes. She was younger than he had first thought, mid-20s, perhaps, with a face that might have been beautiful if it weren't so guarded. A faint scar marked her left shoulder, visible where her dress had slipped. "I'm Isadora," she said when he finished. "Isadora Halvard. And you are?" "Oryx." He returned the empty bowl. "I owe you my life." "You do." No false modesty, just simple truth. "What happened to you?" He had known this question would come and had prepared his answer during fevered moments of consciousness. The truth was dangerous, complicated. She had saved him, but that did not mean he could trust her with secrets that could topple kingdoms. "I'm an alpha," he said cautiously. "From a territory south of here. I was attending a council meeting when someone poisoned the wine, wolfsbane and silver, mixed to kill slowly." He touched the ribs where the worst wounds had been. "I shifted and fled before they could finish what they'd started." Isadora's eyes narrowed. "The frozen peaks are nowhere near any southern territories. How did you end up here?" "Instinct." That much was true. When you're dying and running blind, you don't choose a direction. You just run. She studied him for a long moment, and Oryx felt the uncomfortable impression that she could see through his omissions. But she did not press, instead moving to examine his wounds with hands that were rough, but surprisingly gentle. "These are healing faster than they should," she said, peeling back the bandage on his ribs. "Even for an alpha. I've treated serious injuries before. This should have taken weeks." Oryx glanced at the injury himself and had to agree. Where there should have been raw flesh and oozing poison, he saw pink scars that looked days old rather than hours. Something about this place, about her, had accelerated his healing in ways that defied natural law. "Perhaps your herbs are better than most," he suggested. "My herbs are the same ones every healer uses." She replaced the bandage with quick, precise movements. "But I'm not complaining. The faster you heal, the sooner you can leave." The words carried no malice, yet they cut deep. Oryx's wolf growled inside him, offended by the suggestion. This was their mate. How could she wish them gone? "Because she doesn't know," he reminded himself. "She doesn't feel what we feel." But that was untrue. He had seen her expression when she had touched him as a wolf, the flicker of wonder, confusion, and something more. She felt something. She just didn't understand it yet. In the days that followed, as his strength returned, they fell into an uneasy coexistence. The blizzard raged outside, confining them together in close quarters that forced a kind of intimacy neither was prepared for. Isadora spoke of her life in measured words that revealed more than she likely intended. She had been rejected by her pack at 21 when her wolf failed to manifest fully during the ritual. The pain in her voice made Oryx's hands clench instinctively. "They called me broken," she said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Defective. An Omega who couldn't even shift properly wasn't worth the pack's resources." "That's not how Omegas should be treated," Oryx said, his voice sharper than intended. "They're essential to pack structure. I know what we're supposed to be." She cut him off. "Nurturers, peacekeepers, the heart of the pack. But that only matters if your wolf is strong enough to contribute. Mine wasn't." "And after the rejection?" "My father died. An accident, they said. But the timing was convenient." Her jaw tightened. "Then I was promised to Alpha Fenrir of the Ironwood territory. A political match to secure trade agreements. I'd met him once. That was enough." Oryx had heard of Fenrir. A ruthless alpha, infamous for treating his pack as property rather than people. The thought of this woman bound to such a male made his wolf surge with anger. "You ran," he said, "the night before the wedding, left everything behind." She stared into the flames. "Including my sister, Ingrid. She's 26 now, probably married. She begged me not to go, said I'd die out here alone." A bitter smile flickered across her face. "She thinks I did die. Maybe part of me has." The weight of her words pressed against him. Oryx wanted to reach for her, to offer comfort, but he felt she wouldn't accept it. Not yet. "Does anyone from your pack know you're alive?" he asked cautiously. "No, and I'd prefer it stay that way." She met his eyes directly. "You know anything about the Halvard pack? Being an alpha from the south, you must hear news." Oryx's throat tightened. He knew far more than he could say, but revealing it would expose his identity, and he wasn't ready for that conversation. "Pack politics reach even into the frozen peaks," he said instead. "I've heard the name, but nothing specific about recent events." It wasn't quite a lie, more an omission. The distinction felt thin. On the 7th day, Oryx made a proposal that changed everything. "Let me help you," he said, as they broke their fast on dried fish and hard bread. "Your wolf isn't broken. It's suppressed. Trauma can do that, especially if it happens during a vulnerable moment like the ritual." Isadora set down her cup. "What are you suggesting?" "Training. Let me see if I can coax your wolf forward properly." At her skeptical look, he added, "What do you have to lose? If it doesn't work, you're no worse off than you are now." She considered him for a long moment. "And if it does work? If my wolf emerges fully? Then you reclaim a part of yourself that was stolen." That evening, they went outside for the first time since the blizzard began. The storm had eased to a gentle snowfall, and the world lay blanketed in pristine white. Oryx led her away from the cabin to a small clearing where the snow was lighter. "Close your eyes," he instructed. "Stop thinking about the ritual. Stop thinking about what they said you were. Just feel." Isadora obeyed, her breath rising in visible clouds. Oryx moved behind her, close enough that his warmth brushed her back without touching. He could sense her wolf now, a frightened creature huddled deep within, convinced it wasn't strong enough to exist. "Call to her," he murmured near her ear. Not with desperation or fear, with certainty. "She's yours. She's always been yours." For long minutes, nothing happened. Then Isadora's body tensed, a gasp escaping her lips. Power rippled across her skin, visible as a shimmer in the air. Her form began to blur, bones shifting, muscles reforming. The transformation was messy at first, painful, but it completed. Where Isadora had stood, a wolf now crouched. Smaller than Oryx's wolf form but perfectly proportioned, with fur the same chestnut shade as her hair and those striking gray-blue eyes. She looked at him, wonder and disbelief mirrored in her gaze. Oryx shifted then, letting his own wolf emerge. In this form, the mate bond sang stronger than ever, undeniable, overwhelming. He approached slowly, touching his nose to hers in the traditional greeting between wolves who recognized each other as pack. "Mine," his wolf said. "Ours. Protect." After several minutes, Isadora shifted back, the transformation smoother this time. She stood naked in the snow, steam rising from her skin, and stared at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I did it," she whispered. "I actually did it." Oryx shifted as well, retrieving her cloak from the snow and draping it around her shoulders before the cold could reach her. "You were never broken, just buried." She looked up at him, and the carefully maintained walls around her began to crack. "How did you know?" "Because I've seen it before. Wolves don't fail. People do." He kept his hands on her shoulders, unable to step away. "You're stronger than they gave you credit for." Something shifted between them. Awareness sparked, sharp and electric. Isadora's pupils dilated, her breath catching. The mate bond pulled at them both, demanding acknowledgement, demanding acceptance. Oryx, she said, but whatever she intended died as he lowered his head and captured her mouth with his. The kiss ignited something primal and fierce. Isadora responded with equal hunger, her hands tangling in his hair as she pulled him closer. They barely made it back to the cabin, stumbling through the door in a tangle of limbs and discarded clothing. That night, as the fire burned low and their breathing slowed, Oryx held her against his chest, feeling the mate bond strengthen between them. Not complete, not yet, but growing, becoming real. Isadora traced patterns on his scarred skin, her touch gentle despite the intensity they'd shared. "This doesn't change anything," she said quietly. "When the snow melts, you'll leave. I'll stay. That's how this works." But even as she spoke, Oryx felt her wolf protest. The connection between them pulled taut at the thought of separation. She felt it too. He could see it in the way her hand stilled on his chest, fingers splaying as if to hold him in place. "We'll see," he said, because the truth was too complicated, and his secrets remained his own. For now, this was enough. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight, wrapped in each other and the warmth of acknowledgement neither could fully voice, they found something resembling peace. Even if they both knew it couldn't last. Chapter 4. The Weight of Crowns. The blizzard broke on the 12th morning. Isadora woke to a silence so profound it felt unnatural after days of howling wind. Pale sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. Beside her, Oryx stirred, his arm tightening around her waist before consciousness fully returned. 12 days trapped together had shifted something fundamental between them. The walls Isadora had built around herself had fallen under the weight of closeness and an undeniable bond. Her wolf purred with contentment whenever Oryx was near, a sharp contrast to the long years of silence she had endured. Yet as she watched his profile in the pale morning light, unease twisted in her stomach. She truly knew so little about him. An alpha from the south, poisoned, fleeing north. That was all, and it felt incomplete in ways she couldn't fully name. The storms passed, Oryx said as he opened his eyes. The amber depths held something she couldn't quite decipher. Regret, perhaps, or resignation. Yes. Isadora sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "So you'll be leaving soon." He was quiet for a long moment before sitting up as well. "We need to talk. Properly." The gravity in his voice made her pulse jump. "About what?" "About who I really am." He dragged a hand through his dark hair, the movement almost uncertain. She had never seen him like this before. "I haven't been completely honest with you." Cold dread settled in her chest. "What does that mean?" Oryx stood and dressed with measured, deliberate motions. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was carefully controlled. "I am an alpha. That part was true, but I'm not just any alpha from a southern territory." "Then what are you?" The words came out sharper than she intended, fear pushing her to defensiveness. "I am Oryx, Alpha King of the 7 territories. I rule all shifter packs from the southern reach to the frozen peaks. Every alpha you've ever known answers to me." The world seemed to tilt. Isadora gripped the edge of the bed as her mind struggled to absorb his words. Alpha King. Not merely a pack alpha, but the highest authority over all shifters. The ruler whose word was law, whose power was legend, whose name inspired both fear and reverence. "You lied to me," she whispered. "I omitted," he said, then winced. "Which is still a lie. I know. I'm sorry." "Sorry?" She rose, anger surging through her and lending her strength. "I saved your life. I cared for you. I gave myself to you. And you couldn't even tell me the truth about who you were? Would you have believed me if I'd told you from the beginning? He asked. Would you have trusted that the Alpha King himself had collapsed on your doorstep? He asked quietly. Or would you have thought me insane? I deserve the truth. Her wolf snarled inside her, caught between rage at his deception and a fierce, unwanted thrill at learning their mate was even more powerful than she had sensed. You let me bare my life to you while keeping yours hidden. You asked about my pack, about my sister, while knowing things you refused to share. You're right. Oryx stepped toward her, then stopped when she retreated. You deserved honesty. But my position means I am surrounded by enemies. Countless, merciless ones. Trust is difficult when every day someone is plotting your death. I'm not your enemy, Isadora said, hating the crack in her voice. No, you're not. His expression softened. You're my mate. And that makes you the most valuable leverage anyone could use against me. The word mate hung between them, spoken aloud at last instead of lingering unspoken. Isadora folded her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with her lack of clothing. Tell me everything, she said firmly. The truth. All of it. And he did. Oryx told her how he had been poisoned during the Royal Council ceremony, not by outside forces, but by someone within his own court. Wolfsbane and Silver, combined into a compound meant to kill slowly, to trap him in wolf form until the poison completed its work. Valdis, his most trusted counselor, was the primary suspect, though Oryx had no proof. Bjorn, my beta, helped me escape, Oryx continued, pacing the cabin. He got me to the northern border before returning to investigate. I ran for 8 days as a wolf, half dead, guided by instinct alone. His amber eyes locked onto hers. That instinct led me to you. The mate bond pulled me north, even before I understood what I was feeling. My wolf knew. Isadora sank onto the bed, trying to process it all. 8 days, she whispered. You traveled 8 days while poisoned with something designed to kill you. The mate bond kept me alive, he said simply. Without it, I would have died in the wilderness days from here. Instead, I collapsed exactly where you would find me. Fate, she murmured. Or something very close to it. Oryx knelt in front of her, close but careful not to touch. There's more you need to know. About your past. A fresh knot of dread tightened in her stomach. What about it? Your father, Halvard, Oryx said gently. He wasn't only a pack healer, he was my royal healer. My confidant, one of the few wolves I trusted without question. He served in the castle for 5 years before his death. Her world reeled. That's impossible, she said hoarsely. My father never left our pack. He was always there, always. He traveled, Oryx interrupted softly. Often. He told your pack he was searching for rare herbs in distant regions. In reality, he was serving at my court, helping me survive the political maze of shifter rule. Memories crashed over her, her father's frequent absences, the strange ingredients he brought home, things no one else had ever seen. The closed-door meetings with visiting alphas she had never been allowed to attend. It all fit now, painfully so. He died 4 years ago, Isadora said, her throat tightening. They said it was an accident. I know. I was informed the moment it happened. Oryx's jaw hardened. I never believed that story. Halvard was too careful, too experienced. Before his death, he had been investigating something involving Valdis. When he died so conveniently, I suspected murder. But without proof, and with the balance of power so fragile, I couldn't act without risking war. Tears burned her eyes. So, my father was killed because he uncovered your counselor's betrayal? I believe that's exactly what happened. Guilt was etched plainly across Oryx's face. I'm sorry. I should have protected him. And you said nothing? She demanded. You never sought justice for him? I had suspicions, not evidence. Oryx resumed pacing. Accusing someone like Valdis without certainty would have shattered the kingdom. I needed proof. Isadora wiped her eyes with an angry swipe. What else? She asked sharply. What other truths are you hiding? Fenrir, Oryx said quietly. The Alpha you were promised to. He was killed 2 years ago during a rogue ambush along the northern trade routes. That's why no one pursued you after you fled. He was consumed by territorial wars before his death, and afterward your pack had no political incentive to search for you. Relief washed through her, followed immediately by guilt. Relief that she would never be bound to that man. Guilt that his death brought her peace. And Ingrid? She asked, her sister's name catching painfully in her chest. My sister who believes I'm dead? She's still with the Halvard pack, Oryx said. I don't know more than that. I can't watch every wolf without drawing attention. Isadora stood, needing to move, needing air. So my father was murdered by your counselor. The Alpha I was meant to marry died fighting rogues. And my sister mourns me while I hide in these mountains. A bitter laugh escaped her. What a disaster. Isadora? No. She raised a hand. I need time. This is too much all at once. I understand. Oryx began gathering his few belongings. But there's something you need to understand too. I have to return to my kingdom. The plot against me is still moving. Valdis thinks I'm dead, and that gives me an edge. But it won't last. I have to move before he tightens his grip on power. Then go, Isadora said, even though the words hurt her to say. The mate bond tugged hard inside her, already rebelling against the thought of him leaving. Come with me. Oryx stepped toward her, taking her hands despite her earlier refusal of his touch. You're my mate. I can keep you safe, give you the life you were denied. Your wolf is strong now. You don't have to hide anymore. I don't know you, she whispered. The man I spent these 12 days with, the one I thought I was starting to love, he wasn't real. He was a lie. He wasn't a lie. Oryx's fingers tightened around hers. Everything between us was real. What I felt, what I did, all of it was true. I hid my title, not my heart. Just your title, she echoed, pulling her hands free. You're the most powerful shifter alive. That's not a small thing to hide. No, it isn't. He didn't reach for her again. But it doesn't change what we are. Mates don't stop being mates just because things are complicated. Isadora moved to the window, looking out over the snow-blanketed land. I can't abandon everything and follow you into a world I don't understand. Into danger I'm not ready for. Then think about it. Oryx's voice came from close behind her, near but careful not to touch. I'll send Bjorn back in 10 days. If you choose this, if you choose me and all that comes with it, leave with him. If not, he hesitated. If not, I'll respect your choice. I'll leave you in peace. You'd really do that? She turned to him. You'd walk away from your mate? I'd hate every second of it. His smile was full of sorrow. The bond would tear at me constantly. But yes, because forcing you would make me no better than Fenrir. They stood facing each other, only inches apart, the weight of an impossible decision hanging between them. At last, Isadora nodded. 10 days. 10 days, Oryx said. He left that same afternoon, wrapped in the furs she'd given him and carrying provisions for the journey. Isadora stood in the doorway, watching as he disappeared among the trees, mounted on a horse that waited at the forest's edge. Royal resources, she thought. The Alpha King didn't travel on foot. The moment he vanished from view, a sharp pain tore through her chest. The mate bond, stretched tight by distance, rebelled violently against the separation. Isadora gasped, pressing a hand to her sternum where it felt as if something essential was being ripped away. Inside the cabin, she collapsed onto her bed and finally let herself cry. Iron exploded through her side as she hit the floor, the air knocked from her lungs. The mercenaries didn't hesitate. They pressed their advantage, hands grabbing, claws raking, weapons swinging. She fought back, teeth snapping, claws slashing, but they were Six and trained, relentless in their brutality. Her wolf roared from deep within, a sound of fury and desperation that rattled the cabin walls. She twisted, kicked, tried to claw her way free, but brute force held her down. Then, a sudden sharp shift in the air. A scent, unmistakable, dominant, familiar, alive, powerful. Oryx. The cabin door splintered under a massive force, wood flying, the mercenaries' heads whipping toward the sound. Oryx stepped in, black fur threaded with silver gleaming even in the dim light, eyes molten amber, radiating raw authority and power that made the intruders hesitate, instinctively aware they were outmatched. A low, reverberating growl rolled from his chest, vibrating through the cabin, through her bones. Her wolf surged in response, roaring in recognition and relief. Energy crackled between them, the mate bond amplifying every movement, every pulse of power. Oryx lunged. In a blur of fur and muscle, he struck the nearest mercenary, tossing him across the room like a rag doll. The others tried to advance, but the Alpha King moved with inhuman speed, precise, lethal. His claws caught leather, ripped through armor, each strike a warning and a death sentence all at once. Isadora scrambled to her feet beside him, instincts sharp, adrenaline flooding her system. They were a pack now. Wolf and mate, synchronized, unstoppable. She slashed at an attacker, teeth flashing, while Oryx intercepted another, jaws snapping, claws tearing. The battle was over in moments that felt like hours. The mercenaries were either incapacitated or fleeing into the snow, fear written across their features as they realized they'd underestimated the Alpha King and his mate. Breathing heavily, Isadora pressed herself against Oryx, fur still warm against his, eyes meeting his. The bond thrummed between them, stronger than ever, fierce and unbreakable. "You okay?" he asked, voice low, almost gentle, despite the lingering growl of dominance in his tone. "I've never been better," she whispered, a small, fierce smile breaking through her bloodied, exhausted face. Oryx's amber gaze softened, resting on her with a mixture of pride and something deeper, something tender. "Good. Because enemies are never far behind, and I won't let you face them alone." For the first time in her life, Isadora felt truly anchored, not just to survival, but to someone who would protect her, fight beside her, and claim her as his own. The storm outside had broken, but a new one of silver, power, and unbreakable bond, had just begun. Silver chains appeared from nowhere, wrapping tightly around her throat and wrenching her back into human form with brutal precision. "Feisty little thing," the leader remarked, pressing his boot firmly into her spine to keep her pinned. "Valdis said she was broken. This one's got teeth." Silver flared where the metal touched her skin. Isadora gasped as her newly awakened wolf protested, its scream muffled while the chains sapped her strength. They hauled her upright, securing cuffs around her wrists and ankles with ruthless efficiency. "What do you want?" she hissed through gritted teeth. "You," the leader said, gripping her jaw and forcing her to meet his eyes. "The Alpha King's mate. Worth more than gold to the right buyer." Ice surged through her veins. Somehow, impossibly, they knew what she was to Oryx. "I'm nobody's mate," she spat. "You've got the wrong woman." "Do we?" He laughed, a sound void of any humor. "Valdis has spies everywhere. The moment that bastard king crawled into the frozen peaks half dead, we knew. The moment you carried him home and played healer, we knew. He released her jaw roughly. And the moment he left here 3 days ago, looking like a lovesick pup, we definitely knew. They dragged her outside, where horses waited among the trees. One of the injured mercenaries glared at her as he wrapped his mangled hand. "Bitch took my fingers." "Should have been faster," the leader said without a trace of sympathy. He lifted Isadora onto a horse, chaining her to the saddle with practiced precision. "We ride hard, 6 days to the capital." 6 days. Isadora's mind raced. 6 days of travel meant Oryx was already there, or would be soon. 7 days remained until he'd promised to send Bjorn for her answer. These mercenaries would deliver her to Valdis before that deadline arrived. The journey began relentlessly. The silver chains made every movement impossible, stealing her strength and leaving her exposed in ways she had never known. Each jolt from the horse sent stabbing pain through her wrists, where the metal bit into her flesh. Worse than the physical agony was the hollow ache of the mate bond, stretched impossibly thin by distance and interference. Isadora reached for Oryx through that fragile connection, sending desperate thoughts across the invisible thread that bound them. Nothing, or almost nothing. A faint flicker of recognition, a distant acknowledgement, but the silver wrapped around her blocked nearly all of it. All she could send was fear and pain. No words, no place, no meaning. Just raw emotion screaming into nothingness. Did he feel it? Did he know she was in danger? Or did he only sense her distress and blame it on their separation? On the second day, one of the mercenaries rode closer to her. He was younger than the rest, his tongue loosened by boredom and frequent pulls from his waterskin. "Never thought I'd be transporting the Alpha King's mate," he said casually. "Valdis is paying triple rates for this job." "Why does he want me?" Isadora asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Leverage." The mercenary drank again. "Kill a mate, you kill the Alpha's strength. Mate bonds aren't just romantic nonsense, they're power conduits. Break one half of the bond permanently, and the other half becomes weak, vulnerable." He grinned. "Valdis plans to force your king to abdicate publicly in exchange for your life. Then he'll kill you anyway, weaken the bastard, and take the throne himself." Isadora's blood turned cold. It wasn't just her life at risk. It was Oryx's power, his throne, everything he protected. "That's treason," she said quietly. "That's politics." The mercenary shrugged. "Valdis has backing. 2 territorial alphas have already pledged their forces. When the Alpha King falls, they'll be rewarded with expanded territories and trade rights." 2 territorial alphas conspiring with Valdis. The plot ran deeper than even Oryx had believed. Her father had died trying to expose this corruption, and now Isadora was trapped at its center. On the 4th day, the leader rode back to inspect his captive. "You're holding up better than expected," he said. "Most Omegas would be broken by now." "I'm not most Omegas." "No, you're not." He studied her with something close to respect. "Valdis said you were from the Halvard Pack? Is that true?" Isadora's throat tightened. "It was. Long ago." "Then you might find this interesting." The leader's smile sharpened. "Your sister sends her regards." The world tipped sideways. "What?" "Ingrid Halvard? Now Ingrid Thornbrook, Luna to Alpha Gregor of the Eastern Reach, one of Valdis's co-conspirators." He watched her reaction with clear satisfaction. "She's been very helpful. Told us all about your little coward's flight 3 years ago. How you abandoned her to face the Pack's judgment alone. How she always knew you were weak." Isadora couldn't breathe. Ingrid, her sister, the one she had mourned, the one she carried guilt for leaving, was married to one of the traitors. Willingly, by choice. "You're lying," she whispered. "Why would I lie?" He shrugged. We'll reach the capital in 2 days. You'll see for yourself when she attends your execution. He spurred his horse forward, leaving Isadora staggering in his wake. That night, chained to a tree while the mercenaries set up camp, Isadora closed her eyes and tried once more to reach Oryx through the mate bond. The silver dulled everything, but she pushed harder than ever, ignoring the searing pain it caused. She felt him then, just for a fleeting moment. A flash of recognition, of desperate concern. He knew something was wrong. But could he find her? Did he even know where to look? "I'm here," she thought desperately. "I'm coming. I chose you. Please find me." Whether her message reached him, she couldn't tell. The bond flickered and faded, leaving her alone with her captors and the crushing knowledge of her sister's betrayal. 2 days remained until they reached the capital. 2 days until Valdis would force Oryx into an impossible choice. 2 days to figure out how to survive what was coming. Isadora stared up at the stars through the forest canopy and made a silent vow. If she got out alive, if by some miracle she survived the conspiracy that had already claimed her father's life, she would make sure every traitor paid for what they'd done, including, if necessary, her own sister. The wolf within her, no longer weak or broken, growled its agreement. The capital rose before them on the 6th day, a sprawling fortress city carved into mountainside stone. Isadora had never seen anything so massive, so imposing. Black towers pierced the sky, their peaks swallowed by low-hanging clouds. Even from afar, she could feel the concentrated power radiating from within those walls. Hundreds of shifters, maybe thousands, all gathered in one place. The mercenaries dragged her through crowded streets filled with merchants and soldiers, none giving a second glance to the chained woman on horseback. In a city this size, misery was commonplace enough to vanish into the crowd. The castle itself was a monument to dominance. Massive gates opened into a courtyard large enough to hold an entire village. Guards lined the walls, eyes sharp and predatory, tracking every movement. Isadora's wolf whimpered beneath her skin, overwhelmed by the intense dominance pressing from all directions. They hauled her from the horse and through corridors of polished stone, past tapestries depicting ancient battles and conquered lands. The silver chains bit into her wrists with every step, but she forced herself to walk with her head held high. Whatever came next, she would face it on her feet. The throne room doors swung open, revealing a space so vast it stole her breath. Columns soared to a ceiling lost in shadow. Torches blazed in iron sconces, casting dancing light across stone floors worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. At the far end of the hall, raised on a dais, stood a single throne of black wood with silver inlay. The man occupying it was older than Oryx, likely in his 50s, silver streaking through dark hair, his cold eyes sizing her up with the precision of a merchant inspecting livestock. Valdis. It had to be. "The Alpha King's whore," he announced to the gathered court, his voice carrying easily across the vast chamber. "Captured in the frozen peaks, where she seduced our beloved king during his moment of weakness." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Isadora counted at least 50 wolves, adorned in noble finery or the leather of seasoned warriors. Power radiated from many, alphas from various territories, all gathered to witness whatever spectacle Valdis had planned. "I am no one's whore," Isadora declared, proud that her voice remained steady. "I saved a dying wolf from the snow, that's all." Valdis's smile was cold and humorless. "Is that what you call it? How convenient that the wolf you saved happened to be the most powerful shifter in existence. How fortunate he spent 12 days in your isolated cabin with no witnesses to contradict whatever poison you whispered into his ears." "I poisoned no one," Isadora said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "But someone did. Someone who knew exactly what mixture of wolfsbane and silver would kill an Alpha King slowly enough for him to escape. someone with access to the royal council's wine. The room fell utterly silent. Valdis's smile froze, twisting into something harsher. Careful, girl. Accusations against the acting regent require proof you don't possess. Acting regent? Isadora's laugh was sharp. Is that what you're calling yourself now that you think Oryx is dead? The king is... Valdis began, but a commanding voice cut through the throne room. The king is very much alive. Every head turned. Oryx stood in the doorway, flanked by a dozen armed wolves. He was dressed for battle, leather and steel replacing the simple clothes from her cabin. His beard freshly trimmed, black hair pulled back, and amber eyes blazing with barely contained fury. He embodied the warrior king, his presence so powerful that several lesser wolves sank to their knees instinctively. Isadora's heart pounded against her ribs. He had come. Despite everything, despite the danger, he had come for her. Oryx. Valdis rose slowly from the throne. We thought you dead. This is a joyous occasion. Save your lies. Oryx stepped into the throne room, his wolves spreading out behind him. Isadora recognized the largest, a sandy-haired warrior marked with battle scars and shrewd eyes. Bjorn, the beta who had helped Oryx escape, stepped forward. I know what you did. I know about the poison. I know about the conspiracy. You know nothing, Valdis snapped, his calm facade cracking to reveal desperation. You have no proof of anything. I have enough. Oryx's gaze found Isadora across the room, softening for a fleeting moment before hardening again. Release her. Now. I think not. Valdis snapped, his fingers. More wolves poured in from the side doors, armed and ready. You see, my king, you've walked into a trap. You care for this broken Omega. You'd do anything to protect her. So here's my offer. Abdicate the throne publicly, name me your successor, and I'll let her live. No deal. Oryx's hand went to the sword at his hip. Let her go, or I'll take her by force. Valdis laughed coldly. You're outnumbered. My wolves are loyal. They'll cut you down before you reach the dais. Your wolves? Bjorn's voice rang out. Look again, traitor. As if on cue, half of Valdis's supposed supporters turned, weapons now aimed at their former allies instead of Oryx. The throne room erupted into chaos. Steel rang against steel. Wolves shifted mid-leap, fur and fangs replacing human form in heartbeats. Isadora struggled, but the silver chains held her fast, forcing her to watch helplessly as violence tore through the room. Oryx carved a path toward her, cutting down opponents with brutal precision. She had seen him weak and fevered, vulnerable and raw. This was something else. This was the Alpha King in his element, a warrior who had earned his throne through strength and cunning. The girl! Valdis shrieked. Kill the girl! A wolf broke from the melee, charging straight at Isadora. She tried to shift, tried to defend herself, but the silver blocked everything. The wolf's jaws snapped toward her throat. Then Oryx was there, intercepting the attack, tearing the enemy wolf's throat out with savage precision. He shifted back to human, blood staining his hands and chest, and began working on her chains. I've got you, he said, voice rough. I've got you. I should have sent Bjorn sooner. I felt your fear through the bond but couldn't locate you. I'm sorry. Behind you! Isadora screamed. Oryx spun, but not fast enough. Valdis's blade slashed across his ribs, opening a deep gash that immediately bled heavily. Oryx staggered, and Valdis pressed the attack, driving the sword toward Isadora's chest. If I can't have the throne, neither can you. Time seemed to slow. Isadora saw the blade coming, saw Oryx trying to intercept, too injured to move quickly enough, and saw her own death reflected in polished steel. The sword plunged into her abdomen, tearing through flesh and muscle with agonizing precision. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and overwhelming. She gasped, tasting copper, feeling warmth spread across her skin as blood poured from the wound. But beneath the pain, something else stirred. Deep within her core, where her father's blood ran strong, power awakened. Not the wolf, not the shifter strength she had recently reclaimed. Something older. Something Halvard had entrusted to her with his dying breath. Silver light erupted from Isadora's hands, illuminating every corner of the throne room. The chains binding her shattered, melting like ice under flame. The sword lodged in her gut glowed, white hot, forcing Valdis to release it with a scream. Isadora grasped the blade still embedded in her flesh and pulled. It came free in a spray of blood and light. The mortal wound beneath began to close. Flesh knitted at impossible speed, skin sealing over muscle until only smooth, unbroken skin remained, her dress soaked in blood. "What is this?" Valdis stumbled back, terror replacing triumph. "What are you?" "My father's daughter," Isadora said, her voice carrying a power that made wolves shrink back. "Halvard knew you'd killed him. Before he died, he performed a ritual. He gave me his gift, amplified it, and hid it deep so I wouldn't discover it until I needed it most." She advanced toward Valdis, light still streaming from her palms. Around the room, the battle had frozen. All eyes were on the Omega glowing like a fallen star. "You took my father," Isadora said. "You tried to take my mate. You've killed innocents and betrayed your king for nothing but power." Her hands rose, silver light intensifying. "No more." But Oryx was there before she could strike. His hand clamped around Valdis's throat, lifting the traitor off his feet with contemptuous ease. "This death is mine," Oryx said quietly, snapping Valdis's neck with a single, brutal motion. The body crumpled to the floor. The remaining conspirators, seeing their leader fall, dropped their weapons and surrendered. The battle ended in heartbeats. The throne room was suddenly still, save for the heavy breathing of survivors and the groans of the wounded. Isadora turned to Oryx, her power still crackling across her skin. He was bleeding badly, the wound deep enough to be serious even for an Alpha King. Without hesitation, she pressed her glowing hands to his ribs. The light flowed from her into him, carrying healing with it. His flesh knit together beneath her palms, the gash closing as swiftly as her own wound had. Around the room, injured loyalists gasped as the same silver light touched them, mending cuts and broken bones with effortless precision. When it finally faded, when the last wound was closed and the final pain eased, Isadora swayed. Oryx caught her before she could fall, holding her close. "Easy," he murmured. "That took a lot out of you." "I'm fine," she lied, though exhaustion tugged at every bone. "Did we win?" "We won this battle." Bjorn approached, his expression grim. But messengers just arrived. The 2 territorial alphas who backed Valdis have already mobilized their forces. Armies are marching on the capital from both east and west. Oryx's arms tightened around her. "Then we prepare for war." The weeks that followed blurred into a relentless rhythm of steel and strategy. The 2 territorial alphas had indeed marched their armies toward the capital, emboldened by Valdis's promises of power. Alpha Gregor of the Eastern Reach and Alpha Wulfric of the Western Plains commanded nearly 3,000 wolves between them. Seasoned fighters promised lands and titles for loyalty to a dead traitor. Isadora found her role in the chaos not as a warrior, but as something more vital. Her healing gift, dormant for 24 years before awakening in that desperate moment, proved invaluable. When skirmishes erupted along the borders, she rode with Bjorn's scouts, her hands glowing silver as she mended wounds that would have claimed lives. Soldiers watched her with awe bordering on worship. The broken Omega who had been rejected by her pack now held life itself in her palms. She heard their whispers, felt their reverence, and finally understood what her father must have experienced. To heal was to cradle someone's existence and choose to preserve it. The responsibility was staggering. You're doing well, Oryx told her one evening as they reviewed battle plans in the war room. Maps covered the table, marked with positions and supply lines. The troops trust you. That matters more than you realize. I'm not a Luna yet, Isadora said quietly. I'm just the Alpha King's mate. There's a difference. Is there? His amber eyes held hers. You've saved more lives in 3 weeks than some Lunas do in a lifetime. You've earned their loyalty through action, not title. The mate bond between them had strengthened daily, a constant awareness of each other's presence that both comforted and distracted. They hadn't completed the claiming yet, both too absorbed in survival to focus on ceremony. But Isadora felt it tugging at her, demanding acknowledgement, demanding completion. The decisive battle came on a gray morning when both enemy armies struck the capital at once. Oryx had anticipated their coordination, positioning his forces to create a pincer movement, trapping the attackers between loyal troops and the city walls. The fighting lasted 3 days. Isadora moved across the battlefield like a spirit of mercy, silver light streaming from her hands as she touched soldier after soldier. Gaping wounds closed, broken bones knit together. Exhausted warriors found new strength. She pushed herself beyond reason, beyond safety, until Bjorn had to carry her off the field when she collapsed from exhaustion. By the third sunset, both enemy alphas had been captured. Their forces, seeing their leaders chained and facing an alpha king whose loyalty was earned through strength rather than fear, surrendered. The war was over before it had truly begun. The public trials were held in the throne room, every territorial alpha summoned to witness justice. Isadora stood beside Oryx's throne, no longer chained or helpless, acknowledged as his mate. When the guards brought in Alpha Gregor, her breath caught. Behind him, also in chains, walked Ingrid. 3 years hadn't changed her sister much. Still beautiful, still carrying herself with that careful grace that had always made Isadora feel clumsy by comparison. But there was a hardness in Ingrid's expression now, a bitterness that hadn't been there before. Their eyes met across the room. Ingrid's widened in shock, clearly not expecting to see the sister she had believed dead. Then her expression shuddered, going deliberately blank. Ingrid Thornbrook, Oryx announced, his voice carrying through the assembled crowd. Luna to the traitor Alpha Gregor. You stand accused of conspiracy against the crown and providing intelligence to our enemies. How do you answer? Guilty. Ingrid's voice was steady. I married Gregor of my own will. I supported his claim. I harbor no regrets. Murmurs rippled through the room. Isadora stepped forward, unable to stay silent. Why? Her voice came out hoarse. You were my sister. You begged me not to leave. You said I'd be alone. Alone? Ingrid laughed, sharp and cutting. I was always alone, Isadora. Do you know what it was like growing up in your shadow? Poor, broken little Isadora who couldn't shift properly. Father spent every spare moment trying to fix you, teaching you herbs and healing because you couldn't be a proper wolf. I was strong. I was everything our pack valued. But did I receive any of that attention? No. It was always you. The words hit Isadora like physical blows. She had never known, never suspected. When you ran, Ingrid continued, her chains clinking as she gestured. I was blamed. Your failure became my shame. The pack said I should have stopped you, should have convinced you to accept your duty. They punished me for your cowardice. So you joined a conspiracy to murder the Alpha King? Isadora's voice hardened. You helped traitors because you were jealous? I joined powerful wolves who saw my worth. Ingrid's composure cracked. Gregor offered me respect, position, the life I deserved. He promised that when Valdis took the throne, we would rule the Eastern Reach with complete autonomy. For the first time in my life, someone wanted me for who I was, not who I could never be. And now? Isadora asked. Was it worth it? Ingrid's expression twisted with something ugly. At least I didn't spend 3 years hiding in the mountains like a coward. No, you spent them plotting treason. Isadora's voice remained steady despite the pain lancing through her chest. I fled an abusive marriage. You chose betrayal. Those aren't equivalent. She turned to Oryx, aware that every eye in the room watched them. I have no sister. The girl I knew died the day she chose ambition over loyalty. Do with her what you will. Isadora, please. Ingrid's voice broke, tears suddenly streaming down her face. I'm still your sister. I'm sorry. I was angry. I wasn't thinking clearly. Please, you can't let them kill me. The manipulation was obvious, the tears calculated. Isadora recognized it instantly, having seen Ingrid use the same tactics as a child to avoid punishment. Some things never changed. Exile, Isadora said to Oryx. Send them both beyond the frozen peaks. Let the mountains that sheltered me become their prison. Let them survive on their own, with nothing but each other and the cold. Oryx studied her for a long moment, then nodded. So be it. Alpha Gregor and his Luna are hereby exiled beyond the northern borders. Any who give them aid or shelter will face the same fate. Take them away. As guards dragged Ingrid from the throne room, she screamed curses and pleas in equal measure. Isadora watched impassively until the doors closed, then allowed herself a single, shuddering breath. Are you all right? Oryx asked quietly. No, she admitted. But I will be. The claiming ceremony was held that same evening. Isadora had expected something simple, a formality to acknowledge their bond. Instead, she found herself dressed in a gown of midnight blue that made her skin glow, her hair braided with silver thread, standing before every alpha in the 7 territories. Oryx wore ceremonial armor, black steel inlaid with silver runes that caught the torchlight. He looked every inch the warrior king as he took her hand before the assembled crowd. I claim this woman as my mate, he announced, his voice carrying power that made lesser wolves bow their heads. Isadora Halvard, daughter of Halvard the Healer, survivor of rejection, keeper of the ancient gift. She is mine by choice and destiny both. Any who challenge this claiming challenges me. Silence. No one dared speak against the Alpha King. Do you accept? Oryx asked, his amber eyes holding hers. I accept, Isadora said clearly. I claim you as my mate, Oryx, Alpha King of the 7 territories. I choose you freely, completely, for as long as we both live. The mate bond flared between them, visible as golden light wrapping around their joined hands. The crowd gasped, but Isadora barely noticed them. All she felt was the connection solidifying, becoming unbreakable. That night, in chambers sealed against intrusion, Oryx completed the claiming. His teeth sank into the juncture of her neck and shoulder, the bite both pain and pleasure so intense that Isadora cried out. The mate bond snapped fully into place, tying them together in ways that transcended the physical. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Isadora traced the matching mark on Oryx's shoulder where she had bitten him in return. No regrets? He asked softly. None, she said, meaning every word. This is where I belong. Outside their chamber, guards stood witness that the claiming was complete. Inside, the Alpha King and his Luna began their life together, bound by choice and fate in equal measure. 6 months had passed since the claiming ceremony, and the capital barely resembled the blood-stained battlefield it had been. Isadora stood at the window of her private study, watching snow fall gently over the city below. Winter had returned to the kingdom, but this time it brought peace instead of war. The changes had been gradual but profound. The Royal Council, once a gathering of only the most dominant alphas, now included representatives from every rank. 3 Omegas sat on the council, their voices heard and respected for the first time in living memory. The decision had shocked the traditionalists, but Oryx had been adamant. If my Luna can save hundreds of lives and help win a war, no one can tell me Omegas lack value, he'd declared during the first Reformed Council meeting. The argument had ended there. Isadora's healing network had spread across all 7 territories. She'd found her father's journals hidden in the castle archives, decades of research and knowledge that Halvard had painstakingly documented. Using those notes, she'd trained 50 healers in the basics of the craft, though none possessed her gift for instant regeneration. Still, they saved lives daily with herbs and skill, and that was enough. She touched her abdomen absently, feeling the slight swell that had appeared over the last few weeks. The discovery had been both thrilling and terrifying. A child, an heir to the throne, a small life that would inherit both Oryx's strength and her healing gift, if the old texts about such things could be trusted. "You're thinking too loudly," Oryx said from the doorway. He'd shed his formal armor for simple leather and wool, looking more like the man she'd nursed in her cabin than the king who commanded armies. "I can feel your worry through the bond." "I'm not worried," Isadora lied. "Liar." He crossed the room, wrapping his arms around her from behind and placing his hands over hers on her stomach. "Tell me what troubles you." "Everything," she admitted. "Nothing. I don't know. 6 months ago, I was alone in the mountains, convinced I'd die there. Now I'm Luna to the Alpha King, carrying the heir to 7 territories, responsible for the lives of thousands. Some days I still feel like that broken Omega who couldn't shift properly." "But you're not her anymore." Oryx's breath was warm against her ear. "That girl died in the snow when she chose to save a dying wolf instead of herself. The woman who took her place is stronger than she knows." "Pretty words?" Isadora said, but she leaned back into his embrace. "True words." He turned her to face him, his amber eyes serious. "You want to go back, don't you? To the cabin." She shouldn't have been surprised, he knew. The mate bond made hiding emotions nearly impossible. "Just for a few days. Before winter makes the journey too dangerous. Before my duties make leaving impossible. I need to see it again, to remember who I was before all this." "Then we go." Oryx kissed her forehead. "Tomorrow. Just you and me, like it should have been from the start." They left at dawn with minimal escort, just Bjorn and 2 guards who would remain at the base of the mountain while the royal couple continued alone. The journey took 3 days by horse, retracing the path Isadora had walked when carrying Oryx through the blizzard. The cabin looked just as she had left it. Small, rough, and alone. Yet standing in front of it now, Isadora felt no embarrassment at its simplicity. This place had kept her alive. It had protected her when she had nowhere else to turn. It was where she had changed from a victim into a survivor. "It's smaller than I remember," Oryx said as he dismounted. "I still can't believe you carried me 6 miles to this place." "I can't believe it either, honestly." Isadora pushed the door open, breathing in the familiar smell of smoke and herbs. Everything was exactly where she had left it. The table, the bed, the fireplace, still holding ashes from that final morning. "The mate bond gave me strength I never knew I had." They spent the afternoon cleaning and readying the cabin to stay in. Oryx split wood, while Isadora swept and aired the blankets. There was a quiet comfort in the simple chores, a reminder that beneath crowns and titles, they were just 2 people who had found each other in impossible circumstances. As evening settled in, they sat beside the fire Oryx had built, sharing dried meat and bread from their packs. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick flakes quickly hiding the dark forest. "Another blizzard," Isadora said softly, watching through the window. "Seems fitting." Oryx pulled her closer. "This is where our story began, in a storm, with you defying reason and nature to save me. I didn't know who you were then. I didn't know saving you would change everything." "Would you have left me if you'd known?" he asked. Isadora thought carefully. No. Even then, my wolf knew something. I couldn't have walked away any more than I could have stopped breathing. That night, they made love with the gentleness of wolves who fully knew one another. It wasn't the desperate heat of their first joining, but something deeper and more meaningful. Afterward, Isadora rested her head on Oryx's chest, listening to his heartbeat and feeling their child move faintly inside her. "Tell me honestly," she said into the quiet. "Do you regret it? Choosing a mate who brought so much complication? An Omega rejected by her pack, whose sister became a traitor, whose existence nearly cost you your throne." "Never." His reply was instant and fierce. "You saved my life twice, once in the snow, and once when you gave me a reason to keep fighting instead of just surviving. Before you, I was a king. Respected, feared, obeyed. But I wasn't truly alive. I was only existing. And now? Now I have everything." His hand spread protectively over her stomach. "A mate who challenges me, an heir on the way, a kingdom at peace. This is what I was meant for, Isadora. Not just to rule, but to live." She lifted her head and kissed his jaw. "I love you. I don't think I've said that enough. You show it every day." Oryx's smile was clear even in the low firelight. "But I like hearing it too." They stayed at the cabin for 3 days, cut off from the world by snow and by choice. They hunted together in wolf form, their coats standing out beautifully against the white land. They spoke about plans for their child, about changes they wanted to make, about small, simple dreams of a future they would build side by side. On the fourth morning, the storm eased enough to travel. Isadora stood in the doorway one final time, fixing every detail in her memory. The rough table where she had treated Oryx's injuries, the bed where they had first confessed what they meant to one another, the fireplace that had kept them alive through 12 critical days. "We'll come back," Oryx said, sensing her hesitation. "This will always be our refuge. When court politics become unbearable, when the weight of crowns grows too heavy, we'll return here and remember." "Remember what?" Isadora asked. "That before we were King and Luna, we were just two broken people who saved each other." He took her hand. "Come, our kingdom waits, but this place will always remain." They rode down the mountain as snow continued to fall softly around them. Isadora glanced back once, watching the cabin fade into the white, and felt no sadness. She was leaving, yes, but not running away. She would return, and that changed everything. The journey back to the capital took 4 days. When they arrived, the city welcomed them with celebration. News of the Luna's pregnancy had spread, and wolves filled the streets, cheering and howling in approval. Isadora waved to them, feeling the weight of duty but no longer fearing it. That night, standing on the balcony of their chambers with Oryx's arms around her and their child growing inside her, Isadora watched snow fall over the capital and reflected on how far she had come. From rejected Omega to Luna, from broken to whole, from alone to cherished. "What are you thinking?" Oryx asked. "That I'm not afraid anymore," Isadora said truthfully. "Not of winter, not of the future, not of who I am. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I belong." "You are." His hands rested over her stomach where their child lay. "You're home." And he was right. Not the mountain cabin, not the castle with its throne and politics, but here. In his arms, with their child between them and a kingdom to shape together. This was home. This was where she belonged. Snow continued to fall, covering the world in a soft white blanket, but Isadora no longer saw it as something to fear or endure. It was simply another season in a life far richer than she had ever imagined. She had been broken, rejected, alone. Now she was claimed, cherished, and strong. The path from one to the other had cost her family, innocence, and the illusion of safety. But it had given her everything that truly mattered: purpose, love, and the courage to meet whatever lay ahead. Oryx pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "Ready to go inside, my Luna?" "Ready," Isadora replied, meaning every word. Together they turned from the snowy night, stepping back into their chambers, into their future, into the life they had chosen and claimed for themselves. Behind them, winter painted the world in white. Ahead, whatever tomorrow held, they would face it together. And as sleep finally claimed her in her mate's arms, Isadora knew one thing for certain. That was more than enough.